The storm raged outside, but inside his lips brushed my hand, and his whispered. Words left me trembling. If you want me to stop, say it, I didn't. I suppose there's a certain kind of beauty in solitude at least. That's what I tell myself every morning. As I stand on the porch of my small house, cradling a warm cup of tea between my hands. From here I can see the rolling green hills stretch endlessly. The horizon shimmering faintly in the morning. Sun, my little home tucked away at top. This hill is surrounded by a garden. I've put years of work into wildflowers of every shade, sway gently in the breeze. Delicate riot of colors against the muted gray of the house. It's peaceful, almost idyllic, but it's a peace that doesn't reach me anymore. I'm Maggie, 50 years old, and living alone. My husband Richard passed away 2 years ago, cancer. We fought it together for as long as we could. But in the end, it was a battle. We weren't meant to win. Since then, life has felt stalled, like I'm stuck. Between what once was and what could be unable to move, either way I catch my reflection often in windows or mirrors. I'm not even trying to look into there. I am still me. But a me that feels far away. My figure has filled out over the years, softened by time and comfort food. After Richard's passing, my hair, a deep chestnut with a few silvery threads, sneaking in falls in loose waves that I usually tie back at the nape of my neck. My skin sun-kissed from tending the garden has fine lines etched into it now, especially around my ears and mouth. Those eyes, Richard used to say, were the first thing he noticed about me, deep and dark. He called them like they held the entire night sky. Now when I look at them in the mirror, they just look tired. Not dull exactly. There's still a flicker of something there. Strength maybe, or stubbornness. Most days I slip into simple cotton dresses that skim over my body, flattering but unassuming. I like the way they feel against my skin, the way they move when I walk. There's a quiet confidence in knowing you're comfortable in your own clothes, even if you're not always comfortable in your own skin. My days follow a rhythm that feels both comforting and suffocating. Morning tea on the porch. Hours spent weeding. Pruning and watering the garden lunch alone at the worn wooden table in the kitchen. Afternoons reading in the sunlit living room or tidying the house, though there's hardly anything left to tidy. And the evenings. Those are the hardest. I light a fire in the hearth. As the sun dips below the hills, its last golden rays stretching long shadows across the room. I sit in the same armchair I've had for years, a patchwork quilt draped over the back, and open a book. Sometimes I read, sometimes I don't more. Often I find myself staring into the fire, watching the flames twist and flicker. Richard used to sit across from me in the evenings, his glasses perched on his nose, a newspaper spread open in his lap. I still glance at his empty chair from time to time, half expecting to see him, there looking up at me with that little smile of his. This house holds so much of him. The creak of the floorboards under my feet reminds me of the way he used to stride across the room. The faint scent of his cologne still lingers in the closet where his jackets used to hang. Even the light spilling through the windows seems to remember him, casting long shadows that seem to whisper his name sometimes. I wonder if I'll ever feel like myself again, if I'll ever stop measuring time by how long it's been since he was here. Some days it feels like he's just stepped out, like he might walk through the door at any moment with that familiar, absent-minded expression he always wore when he was lost in thought. Other days it feels like he's been gone forever, like I've lived lifetimes without him. I know I've changed the woman. Richard fell in love with young, carefree, full of laughter. Feels like someone I barely recognize anymore. I wonder if he would still see me the same way, with the same light in his eyes. I wonder if I'd even want him to. Sometimes when the ache in my chest feels too heavy, I step out into the garden. There's something grounding about digging my hands into the earth, feeling the cool soil beneath my fingers, but even there surrounded by the life I've nurtured. The emptiness follows me. I suppose that's the thing about loss. It doesn't just take the person you love, It takes the version of yourself you were when you were with them. I'm not unhappy exactly, just stuck trapped in a life that feels too quiet, too small, too far removed from the vibrant, messy, beautiful chaos it used to be. And, though I've made peace with the silence, a part of me still wonders if there's something more out there, if there's a reason to hope again. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. The sun was already high, the warm light spilling over the hills as I knelt in my garden, pulling weeds from between the lavender. My hair clung to the back of my neck, damp with sweat as the late summer heat settled heavily around me. That's when I heard it, the crunch of gravel underfoot. He straightened up, brushing dirt from my hands, and turned to see a man walking up the path. Tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably familiar Ethan. I hadn't seen Ethan in years. Not since Richard's funeral back then. He had been a lean young man in his early 20s, still finding his footing in the world. The Ethan standing before me now was something else entirely. His hair a shade darker than Richard's was, disheveled from what must have been a long journey. His shirt clung to his chest, damp with sweat, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms dusted with freckles. His eyes, those piercing green eyes, met mine. And for a moment, I couldn't look away, Maggie, he said. A small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I hope I'm not intruding. I blinked, forcing myself to recover, Ethan. What a surprise. When he reached the porch, I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door for him up close. I could see the faint stubble along his jawline, the tension in his posture that suggested he hadn't relaxed in a long time. I thought it was time to get away from the city for a while. He said, stepping inside, his voice was low and even. But there was a weight to it, like he was holding something back. The house suddenly felt smaller with him in it. The quiet that had been my constant companion for years was now filled with his presence, warm, steady, and just a little overwhelming as I poured us both glasses of water in the kitchen. I caught him looking around the room. His gaze lingered on the photos on the mantel, the old armchair by the fireplace, and finally on me. I felt his eyes on me even, as I turned away, focusing on the clink of ice cubes against glass. When I handed him his drink, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. It was nothing really, a simple accidental touch. But it was enough to send a strange electric jolt through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, busying myself with wiping down the counter to hide the way my pulse had quickened over lunch. I asked him about the city, what had driven him away, why he had chosen now to come here. But his answers were vague, evasive. The city has too much noise, he said with a rise. Smile too much, going on all the time. I needed somewhere quiet, to think about what I pressed. Gently his smile faltered for a moment, and he looked down at his hands. Everything he said softly, as if the word carried the weight of 100 unspoken thoughts. Something about the way he said it stayed with me. Even as the conversation shifted to safer topics, it wasn't just his words. It was the way. His eyes drifted toward the window as if he were searching for something. Beyond the hills Ethan settled into, the rhythm of life at the house with surprising ease in the mornings. He would go for long walks through the woods, returning with a light sheen of sweat on his skin and a calmness that hadn't been there before in the afternoons. He often sat on the porch, a book in hand, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the garden where I worked. I told myself it was nothing, he was just watching the flowers sway in the breeze, the sunlight catching on the dew. But there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when I looked up and found his eyes on me. Once I caught him, staring as I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Another time I bent down to pull weeds near the hydrangeas, and felt his gaze linger on my hands, the way they moved over the soil. Each glance, each second too long, left me with a strange, fluttering sensation in my chest that I couldn't quite shake one afternoon. I asked Ethan to help me move an old chair in the kitchen. The thing had been sitting in the corner unused and forgotten, and I thought it might be nice to repurpose it, as we lifted it together. Our hands brushed again this time for longer. My fingers grazed his, and I felt the calluses on his palm, rough and warm. I froze just for a moment and glanced up at him. His green eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. "Maggie, are you okay?" He asked, his voice soft. "Yes," I said, quickly stepping back and letting him take the weight of the chair. "I'm fine, but I wasn't fine. My heart was racing, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. The more time Ethan spent here, the more I found myself wondering about him, about why he had really come about the sadness that sometimes crept into his eyes when he thought no one was looking late one evening as he sat on the porch. With his book, I brought him a cup of tea. He looked up, surprised but grateful, and I hesitated before sitting down in the chair next to him. "Why here, Ethan?" I asked after a long silence. Why now he set the book down on his lap, running a hand through his hair. I guess I just needed a fresh start. The city has a way of making you feel lost, like you're running in circles and getting nowhere. I nodded. "Understanding all towel, and do you feel any less lost now?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the horizon, the fading light casting his face in shadows. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "But this feels closer to something real." In the quiet days that followed, I began to notice how much lighter the house felt. With Ethan around, the silence didn't feel as heavy anymore, and the loneliness didn't seem quite so sharp. But there was also a tension building between us, subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. It was in the way his gaze lingered on me, in the way my breath caught when he stood too close, and though I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as nothing I couldn't help. But wonder was I imagining it, or was he feeling it too? The afternoon heat was relentless, but I barely noticed it as I worked on the old fence. At the edge of the garden, one of the wooden planks had come loose, leaning awkwardly against its neighbor, Ich knelt in the dirt, struggling to realign it, when a shadow fell over me. "Let me help," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. I glanced up to see him standing a few feet away, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms dusted with freckles and taut with muscle. There was a bead of sweat tracing a slow path down his temple, catching the sunlight before disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "You don't have to," I said, even as I shifted to make room for him. He ignored my protest, crouching beside me to examine the fence. "You'll hurt your hands if you keep pulling on it like that." Before I could reply, he reached out, his hands brushing against mine as he adjusted the plank. His closeness was almost overwhelming. I could feel the warmth radiating off him, could hear the slight hitch in his breathing as he worked. When Ethan stood to lift the plank into place, his muscles flexed with the effort. I couldn't help but let my gaze wander down the curve of his back to the way his shirt clung to him in the heat. It was only when he turned, catching me mid-stare, that I realized what I was doing. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, something unspoken and electric that made my breath hitch. I quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the hem of my dress. "Thanks," I murmured barely, loud enough to hear he smiled, wiping his hands on his pants anytime Maggie. As he walked back toward the house, I stayed behind, pretending to fuss over the fence. But my hands were trembling, and I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The attic was sweltering, the air thick with dust and heat. Ethan had offered to help me sort through the clutter, claiming he was tired of sitting around together. We waited through decades of memories boxes, of old books forgotten, trinkets and photo albums stacked haphazardly in the corners. "Who's this?" Ethan asked, holding up a faded photograph. I leaned over to look. It was a picture of me from years ago, standing in the garden wearing a white summer dress. The sunlight framed my figure, giving the photo a dreamlike quality that was taken not long after "Richard and I moved here," I said. My voice tinged with nostalgia. I was probably in my 20s. "You were beautiful," Ethan said softly, his tone devoid of hesitation. Or pretense, I laughed, a little too loudly. That was a long time ago. "I don't think so," he replied, still studying the photograph. His green eyes lifted to meet mine, and there was something in them, an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "I think you're still just as beautiful." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My cheeks burned, and I turned away, pretending to sift through another box. But his words lingered, wrapping around me like a warm, unsettling embrace. We worked in silence for a while after that, but the air between us felt charged. Every glance and movement imbued with a tension neither of us dared to acknowledge. Later, we carried a heavy trunk down the narrow attic stairs. Ethan took the lead. His broad shoulders blocking most of the view ahead, I followed cautiously, gripping the bottom of the trunk as we descended. "Careful," he warned. Glancing over his shoulder. "I'm fine," I assured him. Even as the trunk wobbled precariously in my hands halfway down, I stumbled slightly, and his hand shot out to steady me. His fingers closed over mine firm and warm, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and close. Yes, I managed my voice barely above a whisper, but I didn't move. Neither did he. The air seemed to thicken around us, the closeness of the stairwell amplifying every small movement. Every breath his hand lingered on mine, and when I finally looked up, his gaze was already on me. "Maggie," he began, but then he stopped as if he didn't know what to say next. Pulled my hand away, gripping the trunk tighter as I stepped back. "We should keep moving," I said quickly, avoiding his eyes. He nodded, but the moment stayed with me long. After we reached the bottom of the stairs that evening, as I sat by the fire with a book in my lap, I found my thoughts drifting back to Ethan, to the way his hands had felt against mine, to the way he had looked at me in the attic. I told myself it was nothing, just a momentary lapse. A brief crossing of lines that would never be crossed again. Deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because when Ethan walked into the room, a few minutes later, his hair still damp from the shower, and his shirt hanging loosely over his frame, my heart skipped a beat, and when he smiled at me, soft, tentative, I felt something stir within me that I hadn't felt in years. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. It was quiet evening, the kind where the only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic to vegetables on the cutting board. I was at the counter focused on slicing carrots for dinner, when Ethan's voice broke through the silence. "You know, I've always admired you," he said. I paused mid-slice, glancing over my shoulder. Ethan was sitting at the small kitchen table, a worn book open in front of him. His elbows rested on the table, and he was watching me intently. Admired me? I asked, my tone light but tinged with surprise. For what, he leaned back in his chair, his green eyes thoughtful for everything. "The way you've handled everything life's thrown at you, the way you cared for Richard, for this house. You're strong, Maggie, stronger than most people I know." I set the knife down, turning fully to face him. His words felt genuine, but there was something else in his gaze, a weight, a depth that made my stomach flutter uncomfortably. "Richard was lucky to have you," he added softly. There it was again, that unspoken something lingering beneath his words. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, I turned back to the cutting board, my hands suddenly unsure of what to do. In the days that followed, I found myself noticing things I hadn't before, small moments that had always been there, but never registered until now. Ethan's eyes, for one, they had a way of lingering on me just a second too long, as if he was trying to commit every detail to memory. It wasn't the gaze of a nephew toward his aunt by marriage. No, it was something far more complicated, far more dangerous one afternoon. I was watering the garden when I felt it. Again, that sense of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder and found Ethan standing at the edge of the porch. His arms crossed over his chest. The sunlight caught the copper highlights in his hair, and his expression was unreadable. But his eyes betrayed him. I looked away quickly, my cheeks burning, and turned my attention back to the flowers. But the feeling didn't fade, if anything. It grew stronger, wrapping around me like a warm, unrelenting embrace. The storm rolled in suddenly, that evening bringing with it the kind of rain that drowned out everything else when the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, leaving us with only the sound of the wind howling against the windows. Ethan lit a candle and placed it on the kitchen table, its soft glow casting long shadows across the walls. I sat across from him, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, trying to ignore the way the flickering light made his features look sharper, more defined. For a while neither of us spoke. Then Ethan let out a long breath, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "Do you know what I used to think when I was a kid?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, curious despite myself. "What did you think?" he smiled. Faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I used to think you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen my breath." Caught in my throat, and I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Ethan? I know how it sounds," he said quickly, cutting me off. "I was just a kid, and you were married to Richard. It didn't mean anything back then. But as I got older, he hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table as I gulped. Older, it didn't go away. It only got stronger. I was frozen, torn between the urge to flee and the desire to stay rooted to the spot. "Ethan, you shouldn't." I have to, interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've kept this inside for too long, and it's tearing me apart. I know it's wrong. I know it's complicated, but I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop feeling this." His words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. I felt a rush of motion shock, confusion, and something else. Something I didn't want to name. "Ethan." I began, my voice trembling. This isn't something we can." I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not asking for anything, Maggie. I just needed you to know I couldn't keep pretending anymore." I looked away, staring down at my hands, which were trembling in my lap. My mind was racing, but no clear thoughts emerged. How had we gotten here? How had I missed the signs? I don't know what to say, I admitted, finally, my voice barely audible. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. I needed to tell you the truth." The silence stretched between us, thick and almost suffocating. Then slowly Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, almost hesitant, as if he was giving me a chance to pull away, but I didn't. For a moment I let it happen. I let myself feel the warmth of his skin against mine, the quiet reassurance in his touch. It was a brief moment, but it felt like the ground shifting beneath my feet when I finally pulled my hand back. It wasn't out of anger or rejection. It was out of fear. Fear of what this meant. Fear of what it could lead to. "I think we should call it a night," I said, my voice barely steady. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Maggie," as I retreated to my room. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it, my heart pounding his words, his touch, his eyes. They were all still with me, echoing in the quiet of the house. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I wanted the silence back. The storm outside had arrived, without warning, its winds howling through the trees, and rain hammering against the windows inside the house. The power had gone out, plunging everything into a deep velvety darkness. Ethan lit a single candle, placing it on the table between us. The flickering light danced across his face, casting shadows that seemed to exaggerate the sharp angles of his jaw and the intensity of his green eyes. He sat across from him, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, though the warmth did little to soothe the unease that had settled in my chest. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the occasional creak of the house or the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof. Ethan's gaze flickered down to my hands, and I found myself unable to meet his eyes, afraid of what I might see there. "Do you ever feel," Ethan said sudden L, his voice cutting through the quiet, "like you've spent your whole life living for other people?" The question startled me. I looked up, my brow furrowing as I tried to process what he meant. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his hands clasped together. The candlelight highlighted the faint tension in his expression, the way his jaw tightened before he spoke again. "I mean," he said slowly, carefully, "maybe you've never had the chance to live for yourself, to do what you really want, instead of what's expected of you." His words struck a nerve, and I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came instead. I looked down at my mug, watching the faint steam rise into the air. "I've been thinking about it." He continued, his voice softer now, "about how much you gave up for Richard, for this house, for everyone but yourself. And I wonder." He paused, his gaze growing even more intense. "When was the last time you let yourself want something?" "Ethan," I said quietly. "This isn't—" let me finish." He interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. He leaned closer, his hands moving to rest flat against the table. "I've been holding this in for years. Maggie and I can't do it anymore." There was something raw in his voice, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "When I was a kid," he began, his eyes locked on mine, "I used to think you were the most incredible person I'd ever met. You were beautiful, kind, strong. Everything I thought a person should be. But I was just a kid. I didn't understand what I was feeling back then. My heart was pounding now so loud, I was sure he could hear it. And then I grew up." He continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "And those feelings didn't go away. They only got stronger. And now, standing here, sitting across from you, I can't pretend anymore." I shook my head, unable to process what he was saying. "Ethan, you shouldn't. I know it's wrong," he said, cutting me off. "I know how it sounds, but I can't help it, Maggie. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop feeling this." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, like the walls were closing in around me. "Ethan," I managed to say, my voice trembling, "this isn't something we can—" It's not about what we can or can't do," he said, his voice rough with emotions. "About what's real in this, Maggie. What I feel for you. It's real." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't know what he was saying, but the words wouldn't come instead. I looked away, my gaze falling to the flickering candlelight. "You don't understand," I said softly. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not perfect. I don't care about perfect." He applied, his voice steady. "I don't care about your past, about who you think you should be. All I care about is you." Before I could respond, Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I didn't pull away. The silence stretched on, heavy and charged. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my chest, my fingertips. And when I finally looked up, his eyes were waiting for me, full of something I couldn't name. "If you want me to stop," he said, softly, "I will just say the word." I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. All I could do was sit there, frozen, as he stood and walked slowly around the table. He knelt beside me, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he didn't want to startle me. His hand found mine again this time, holding it more firmly. "You don't have to say anything." He murmured, his voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "But I need you to know. I mean every word I say it." He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. It was the smallest of gestures, but it felt monumental, like a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed when he finally stood and stepped back. I felt the loss of his presence like a physic lack. "Good night, Maggie," he said quietly, his gaze lingering on mine for just a moment longer before he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the dim light of the candle. I stayed at the table long after he'd gone, staring at the flickering flame as if it held the answers I so desperately needed. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, confusion, longing, and something that felt dangerously close to Hope. Ethan's words echoed in my head, each one peeling back a layer of the walls I'd built around myself. And as much as I wanted to deny it, as much as I wanted to tell myself, this was all a mistake I couldn't ignore. The truth something had changed, and there was no going back that night after Ethan's quiet confession and the fleeting touch of his lips on my hand. I couldn't sleep. The storm outside had subsided, but inside me a tempest raged, and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the echoes of his words swirling in my mind. "I can't stop thinking about you." I mean every word. My heart ached with a confusion I hadn't felt in years. Ethan's love was real. I had seen it in his eyes, felt it in his touch, and though I tried to deny it, a part of me longed to reach out to let myself be held in the warmth of his affection. But there were too many walls, too many barriers. The memory of Richard loomed large in my mind. How could I move forward when his ghost still lingered in every corner of this house? And then there was the age gap, the inevitable whispers, and judgment if anyone ever found out. Could I bear the weight of that? I buried my face in my hands, the tears coming unbidden. Am I worthy of being loved again? Or would this only ruin the fragile life I've built the next morning? Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. He didn't mention the storm, the candlelight, or his confession instead. He slipped seamlessly back into the rhythm of our days, fixing a loose shingle on the roof, raking leaves in the garden, and bringing firewood in from the shed. But his silence spoke volumes. Every glance, every small gesture seemed to carry the weight of all the things he wasn't saying. I found myself watching him more often, noticing the way he moved with quiet purpose, the way his green eyes softened when they met mine. It was maddening, this unspoken connection between us, so close and yet impossibly distant. A week later, Ethan asked if I'd like to go for a walk. It was a crisp autumn morning, the air sharp but invigorating, and the ground was blanketed. In fallen leaves we walked in companionable silence. At first the leaves crunching under our boots as we followed the narrow path into the woods. The trees towered above us, their branches bare, reaching toward the pale blue sky. When we reached a small clearing, Ethan stopped. He turned to face me, his hands in his pockets, his expression serious. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice steady, buddinged with vulnerability. "But I know I don't want to walk this path without you." I froze his words, striking me like a bolt of lightning. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at him. His eyes filled with an earnestness that made my heart ache. "Ethan," I whispered. But he stepped closer, cutting me off with a shake of his head. "No. Let me finish," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "I know this isn't easy. I know there's a lot standing in our way. But none of that changes how I feel about you. And I don't think it changes how you feel about me either." My eyes began to well with tears, and I shook my head. "You don't understand, and I can't. I'm not what he asked," his voice softening. "Not good enough. Not deserving. Maggie, who told you that was it? Richard, the world, yourself." He stepped closer still, his gaze never wavering. "I don't care about what anyone Hells thinks I don't care about the pastor. The difference in our ages or any of it, all I care about is you. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I couldn't let him finish the emotions. We're too much too raw. I took a step back, shaking my head as the tears spilled over Ethan. I can't do this, I said, my voice trembling. Not because I don't feel anything, but because it's not right. It will never be right. Ethan's expression crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might plead with me to change my mind, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded slowly, the pain in his eyes almost unbearable to look at. If that's what you want, he said quietly. Then I'll go, but I need you to know something. I didn't respond, couldn't respond as he stepped closer one last time. I'll never forget you, Maggie. Never with that. He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving me standing alone in the clearing. When I came downstairs the next morning, Ethan was gone. The house felt emptier than it had in years, and the silence was deafening on the kitchen table. I found a folded piece of paper, with my name scrolled across the front. My hands trembled as I opened it, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Maggie, I hope you find the peace and happiness you deserve, even if it's not with me. Thank you for letting me be part of your life. Even for a little while, Ethan. I pressed the note to my chest, sinking into a chair. As the tears fell freely, I wanted to call out to him to beg him to come back, but I knew it was too late. Days turned into weeks, and life returned to its quiet, solitary rhythm, but it wasn't the same. The house felt colder, the garden less vibrant, the evenings unbearably long. I found myself standing at the window more often, staring down the road Ethan had walked away from, wondering if I'd made the right decision. Had I done the noble thing, sparing us both the pain of a love that could never truly work? Or had I let fear and doubt rob me of something beautiful, something real? I didn't have the answers, and perhaps I never would. Love doesn't always conquer all. Sometimes the weight of the past, the fear of judgment, and the barriers we build around our hearts are too great. But even in its sadness, love leaves its mark. It reminds us that we are alive, that we are capable of feeling deeply, even when it hurts. And though I may never see Ethan again, I will always carry a piece of him with me. And so I sit here staring out at the road, where Ethan disappeared, carrying his love with him. I made my choice. But was it the right one? If it were you, would you have risked everything for love or let fear hold you back? Tell me, what would you have done?